Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Chick Chat Collective. This is Casey, your host, and I am very, very excited to introduce you guys and welcome Suzanne Jabour on the show today. Very excited to have her. We connected on Facebook, and Suzanne is here today. She is going to talk about her experience with grief and loss and just tell you guys a little bit about who she is and the experiences that she has gone through with this, and now how she processes the grief, helps other people to process it, and all of the things that really go into that. So welcome, Suzanne. I'm so happy to have you here. Thank you so much for getting on super early. I know we're in different time zones, but would you please just introduce yourself and tell our listeners a little bit about you?
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm a grieving mom, as you said, and so learned a lot about grief by necessity. And one of the things that I learned was that because we don't talk about it, nobody really understands how it works or the symptoms that might be coming for you, or how we could support each other better, how this impacts our life in the workplace. All the things that we would know if we were talking about it, but because we're not talking about it, we don't know anything. Because we don't know anything, we have a lot of fear. And because we have fear, we all end up isolated. So it's this weird kind of ripple of us not having conversations that I could really clearly see the link between that and us not feeling supported, us not feeling connected when we were in deep grief, us not feeling like people understood what we were going through, even though, as you've learned in your experience, even when you're having something that feels so isolating and like you're the only one, once you start to talk about it, lots of other people have gone through similar things.
Right.
And so, where I became interested in grief, as I said, really was in those most acute days after my son died, was all about survival. I knew I didn't know enough about literally just how to survive it. And that sort of began this curiosity, which now has become, really big and is about, how do we change this whole culture that we have, especially in North America, but in most Western cultures, around grief and the fact that we're not talking about it. And we have no, skills or comfort or ability to really step up in a big way and help people. So that's really become kind of my mission.
That's amazing. And that is, just listening to you talk, it is so relatable just because, my grandfather, who's the closest person to me who's ever died, he died a couple years ago, and it was we knew he was sick, but it was like, went into the hospital. They told him he had a few months to live and was gone in like 3 days.
Wow.
Yeah. And I don't feel like my family and I talked about it, like my grandma's still alive. I don't feel like she really likes to talk about it. She like lives in their house still by herself now. And I try to talk to my dad about it. Sometimes it was my dad's dad. Cause like it's such a shocking thing when it's someone, I can't imagine it being your child, but when it's the closest person to you that you've ever lost, it's just like, it's so real. It's such a different experience than someone who you went to high school with and haven't talked to in 20 years or something, but it's weird to me why more people don't talk about it. It's like, I feel like I want to talk about it, but I don't want to like cross the line or make anybody more upset. But I'm like, aren't people feeling the way that I'm feeling about this? Like, I'm shocked. It's a shocking feeling. You feel like it's not true, like sometimes still, it's been a couple years and I still am like, because we're going on a family vacation next week. And I'm like, my grandpa's not going to be there. Like, it's just, why do you think that is? Why is that in our culture where we just we have the funeral and then are we just supposed to move on?
Yes, that's the hope. And it's impossible and nobody does it. but we're not talking about how none of us are doing it.
Yeah.
First of all, I'm sorry that happened. I know, even when it's someone who is older than you, who really, your whole life you spent knowing that probably your grandfather's going to die before you, it doesn't matter. It still is agonizing and confusing and deeply sad and creates a whole bunch of emotions and feelings. And I think that that's why we don't talk about it. Because in North America, especially, we're very conditioned to not talk about emotions, right? We're great in our head. We're great. Give me the problem. Let's figure out the problem. Let's plot a solution. Let's execute the plan, and move on. And grief doesn't work that way. Grief is messy. It's full of emotions. It goes up and down and side to side. It looks like a big plate of spaghetti, right? It's just all tangled up. And because we are kind of in this culture where we don't want to talk about emotions, I don't think we can talk about grief, because grief is raw, full, tsunami in your face emotions. And so if we don't have a collective ability to talk about emotions, it makes it really hard to talk about grief. And I think because we all feel some fear about it, because we know we don't really know what to say, we know we don't really know what to do. And as you said, we don't want to make it worse. We end up doing nothing. And then time passes and it gets more and more awkward to say or do anything. And so then we just haven't. And it makes us all isolated. And so to me, the first step is we need to get better at our emotions, feeling them, first of all, naming them, even understanding what they are, how they operate, because that's the foundation of us being able to have conversations about grief, because grief is all about emotions. And I just wanted to talk about something else that you mentioned, which is that sense of not wanting to make it worse. I hear from people all the time that they hesitate to say something as time has gone on because they don't want to remind the person. And what I'll say from the perspective of the griever is, you will never remind me. I will always remember. And the fact that someone else remembers too is a huge gift. So any of that hesitation that you have about, you said something at the beginning, now time has kind of passed, you maybe haven't said anything for a while, or because so many of us lost loved ones and all the other kinds of losses that bring grief, when we were in various versions of, lockdown or not seeing a lot of people because of whatever was going on in our lives. For a lot of us, time has passed. It's never too late to say something, because that person will never forget. I know every second of every day that Ben has died. You're not going to remind me. I know the same thing about my mom and my dad and my grandparents and friends and colleagues. Like, we don't forget. And especially when it's like you're experiencing with your grandfather and I'm experiencing with Ben, someone who was really an intrinsic part of our lives. We've had to reconstruct a life without them. And we remember that, right? We remember that he's supposed to be on this trip with you.
Right.
So, that sense that we don't want to make it worse, I don't think it's possible to make it worse. As long as you're saying something or doing something that is really genuine and is honest and has some vulnerability and comes from the heart, all the old cliches and platitudes, they can do harm for sure. Some of them are just awful. So just don't say any of them.
Yeah.
Just say something genuine and uniquely you that's relevant to your relationship with the person you're talking to. And then I don't think you can do harm.
Yeah. My goodness. So do you mind talking a little bit about your personal experience with your son?
Yeah.
And because I actually have a friend. She has become a friend. She started off as my daughter's preschool teacher. And they send introductions to the parents, the teachers do, because she was 2 when she started.
Right. Yeah, they can't tell you much when they come home.
Yeah. And in her introduction, it was how she lost her. So she has an older daughter, but how she lost her 4-year-old son. Well, like she lost him when he was 4. I think he would have been like 8 or 9 when she was getting this email. And in the email, she said, like, my heart is broken forever. But this is where he went to preschool, and I have so many good memories here of him. Yeah. And so she'll be teaching my son now, like he's in the 2s, and like she is one of the most amazing people I have ever met. Just one of those naturally kind, genuine, good-hearted
Mm-hmm.
people. And she's very open, you know, she will post on Facebook sometimes when she's
Mm-hmm.
feeling the grief. And like for me, I know that I don't know how she feels. I know I couldn't ever possibly know how she feels. Losing a child is just beyond
Mm-hmm.
anything that I could imagine, you know? And so I just always tell her, like, I love you and I'm here for you. But I also don't ever know how, if she would want to talk about, because I never met him.
Right.
Um, you know, and I met her like after everything went down. And so I don't know if I like ever should try to bring it up, ask her to tell me about him. You know, I know he got really sick and that's how he passed away.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know if you could elaborate a little bit on your personal experience and then, you know, how you feel about people bringing him up to you, maybe people who have never met him, but they know that that's a part of your life experience,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. And I mean, I can't even imagine going to the place where your child was and literally spending all of your time with children that are the age he was when he passed. That's just resilience beyond the beyond. What I would say is because she's chosen to be public about it, so she's shared it with the parents at the preschool, she's talking about it on Facebook. To me, that gives you some permission to have a conversation. And for me, actually, one of the loveliest things that someone said to me in the very earliest days when people were sharing their condolences, and it was someone who didn't know Ben. And she said to me, you know what? I don't know. I didn't know him. What would you want me to know about him?
I
And
love,
that was such a beautiful question to me because it got me to share, you know, the wonder that was him and
yeah.
all the amazing things about him. You know, he was a unicorn in a herd of horses, 100%, very unique individual, you know, big personality. And I got to share a little bit of that with her. So I think if it's someone who is choosing to be, you know, not as public as I'm being necessarily, but choosing to be open about their reality,
Mhm.
that gives you an opening to be able to say something. I think it's beautiful to ask about the person and to just say, oh, you know, I look at my little guy and some, you know, when I'm dropping him off here, I wonder about yours. And, you know, I would love to hear anything you want to share with me because I bet he was amazing
Yeah.
or something like that, you know, in your own words, right? Whatever is, you know, coming to you at that moment. I think she would probably love that. I would love that.
Yeah.
Um, and I think what's interesting is for each of us with every loss, and I think especially with the loss of someone whose life is really intrinsically tied with yours. So I'm one of the things that I hold a lot of curiosity about is whether the loss of a child and the loss of a spouse have some similarities because that person is so intrinsically tied into your life and you really have to rebuild your own life after they're gone.
Mhm.
So that really was part of my process as well, right? I could very clearly see my life and myself because I knew the person who had gone to bed. I lived that parent's worst nightmare. I got the middle of the night phone call from the police. That's what happened to me. So I knew that the person who had gone to bed the night before that phone call, she didn't exist anymore. I was very clear about that. She was just gone. And that was okay. But I could see, you know, those big chunky 3D puzzles they do on Survivor, those big, huge
Mhm.
puzzle pieces. I could see my life and myself in pieces around me on the floor. And my arms were already full of all the pieces I could carry because your capacity goes through the basement. So I had to start making choices about which of those pieces I was going to try and pick up,
Mhm.
which of those pieces I was going to leave behind and just get okay with leaving them behind because I knew I had to, you know, keep taking baby steps. And that meant I was kind of having to leave some stuff behind. And I was 100% sure that I wasn't leaving Ben behind. So that wasn't optional, right? He was going to be part of my life forever, even though he's not here anymore. So it was a really interesting process of just, you know, baby step by baby step, making choices, making decisions, trying to figure out, you know, who am I now? What is my life now? what does my life look like if it's, if it's as big and bold and fun and exciting as it would have been if he was still here?
Mm-hmm.
So that really became kind of part of the process. And that doesn't happen in those early, most acute days. So if you have found this podcast and you've lost your loved one within the last weeks or months, you're not there. And that's okay. You're, especially if it's weeks, you're just in survival mode. In those early days, I have a daughter as well who was older than Ben. And so all adults involved in the situation. He was 22 when he died. So we would look at each other and just like our mantra for the day was we could do one hard thing. And then the rest of our to-do list was just to breathe. Because to just keep breathing felt like a momentous accomplishment.
Yeah.
So it really, like, if you're in those early days where that's all you can manage, you're not sure how to feed yourself and you don't know what time it is or what day it is, the step-by-step rebuilding your life is coming. And the choices you make in those early days about how to interact with other people or not, how to, deal with your emotions or not, all will kind of set up those next steps. But it really is just little choices, baby steps every day that eventually, baby steps build momentum and they get you a long way over time, right?
Yeah.
So it is that sense of, just little things. That's all you have the capacity for anyway. So don't try big things. It's too much.
Mm-hmm.
Just do little things.
Yeah. And how was it with you and your spouse? Like, was he in the picture when that happened, when Ben passed away? And did you guys kind of take these baby steps together? Did you guys go on your own path with this grieving process? I know everyone does it differently, and, some internalize it for a very long time and then it just kind of bubbles up and comes to the surface. And so can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I'm divorced from my kid's dad. So he's not really a part of my life. I run into him every once in a while because we live in the same place.
Yeah.
But he's not really part of my life. And I assume his grieving process was fine. We had a little bit of contact when Ben died, but not much. What I will say though about grieving with a spouse or a partner or a daughter or whoever, there's a really high divorce rate among parents who've lost a child. And the theory about why that is that it's because we want our spouse or the person we're grieving with to grieve the same as us. Mm-hmm. And if they don't, so I was like a grieving mother, grieving out loud. Like I had to talk about it with people. I cried everywhere. That was the only way I could survive. I couldn't hold it in. I knew if I did, I literally had that vision that you see mostly in cartoons or like super campy movies where the opera singer sings the note and the glass bursts. Yeah. Like I knew I was that glass and I was that fragile and the singing of the note was going to be denying any of it. So I was really grieving out loud. My daughter didn't choose to do it that way. My ex-husband didn't choose to do it that way. I think what happens with people is we think that the other person should be grieving the same way that we are. Mm-hmm. And what we forget is a number of things. We forget that we're not even necessarily grieving the same person. So when I think about my daughter's grief and mine, I'm grieving a son, she's grieving a brother. That's not the same person. Our relationships with him were different. The three of us as a trio were really close. We both had really good relationships with him. But it was still different. She's a different person than I am. Our whole process is going to be different. Like it's not going to be the same. Yeah. And it's so easy for us, especially in those early days when I'm like curled up in a ball sobbing on the couch and she's sitting there silently, for me to think, well, she's not really grieving and I'm really grieving. And then we have a whole story about that. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what happens a lot with parents. It happens a lot in families, right? When each of my parents died, I would look at my brothers and think like, why aren't you grieving? But they were just differently than me. And that's okay. And I think, one of the bad byproducts of us not talking about grief is that we don't really understand how unique it is for each person and how unique it is each time it happens. Mm-hmm. So even, I had lost my dad in my 30s, my mom in my 40s, like Ben was not my first really close loss, unfortunately. But even with that experience, it still was a whole brand new thing that I
Yeah.
had not done before.
Right.
And I think that's just really important to understand, that not everybody wants to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody needs to be supported. And the one universal is grief does need to be witnessed. So even if the person doesn't want to talk about it, they do need it to be acknowledged, right?
Mm-hmm.
That they're in grief and that's okay. And whatever's happening, you know, is fine. You
Yeah.
know, however you would say that, because that's really inelegant, right? But however you would say that. And otherwise, we really just have to give grievers big permission and big compassion that whatever they're going through in any given moment is okay.
I love that. And it's, I've never thought of that before about each loss. You're going to have a different experience, right? Grief is not the
Yeah.
same.
No.
You're not going to feel the same. I'm not going to feel the same probably when one of my parents passes away that I did about my grandfather, or friends or whatever it may be. It really is, everyone had a different relationship with that person. So everybody
Yeah.
is going to process that differently.
Yeah.
I do just feel a little bit like, especially with like my grandma's generation, maybe it wasn't a thing to talk about that kind of stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
so I am, I get concerned and worried about her being there alone. And, so I think, we're leaving actually on this family trip on Sunday and she's going to be there. We're all going to my aunt's house up in Massachusetts. And I think I'm just going to bring it up. And it was my aunt's dad, my dad's dad, and, my grandfather. Just because it feels weird to me to not. Like, I think
Yeah.
about him
I
every day.
agree.
I'm like, don't we think about him? Doesn't everybody think about him every day?
Yeah. I
My
bet they do.
daughter, my daughter is 4. She met him twice when she was like a little baby, because she was a baby and then COVID happened and no one was
Right.
traveling. And then he got sick. My daughter talks about him though. And I don't know, if she actually does see him or talk to him, but she will tell me like Grandpa Fred, she was doing this slingshot thing with her legs, like picking herself up and shooting herself back and forth. And she was like, I'm a slingshot. And I'm like, oh, who taught you that? And she's like, Grandpa Fred. And I was like, oh no, sweetie, like Grandpa Fred has passed away. You're thinking about someone else, And she goes, no, Grandpa Fred, the one that died. And I'm like, I don't know. You're probably talking about somebody. And, and she gets very mad. She's like, no, Grandpa Fred, the one that died. And I'm like, so then I'll ask everyone she calls grandpa or who is like a grandpa figure in her life, like, did you teach her the slingshot thing? And everyone is like, no, absolutely not. And
Because it was Grandpa Fred.
yeah. And I'm like, how amazing is that? I want to be able to tell my family that story, because I think it is so sweet if he is here with her. And he certainly didn't teach her that when she was 2 months old. It's like, it's something that she has learned now as a 4-year-old, and so if you could give how many years out are you now from the death of Ben?
It'll be 3 in September.
Okay. So that's not a lot.
Nope.
But if you could give maybe someone's listening who, like you said, they're in the weeks or the early months, if you could give them, one piece of, I don't even want to say advice, but like one thing of survival that you can just share with them or say to them, what would it be?
What I would say is you have to give yourself permission to grieve, because society is not giving it to us, right? Our workplace isn't giving it to us. Our family is not necessarily giving it to us. Well-meaning friends and acquaintances aren't giving it to us. So we have to give it to ourselves, and we have to really allow all of it. The horrifying, the despair, it's not pretty and it's messy and it feels awful. And that's exactly how it's supposed to be.
Mhm.
And if you can give yourself permission for all of that to be okay and not resist it,
Mhm.
the path is simpler because you're just allowing yourself to feel it all. And, for those of us that don't have great emotional intelligence, that can't really name all those emotions, it's tough. It's
Mhm.
tough. But the more you can get at the nuanced sense of what really the emotions are, the more for me, the more I could talk about it in safe places with people that were able to hear about it. I'm
Mhm.
not suggesting you go, shout it to the rooftops or share it with someone who's insensitive or whatever. But if you can find one or two people that can let you just talk it through, if
Mhm.
you can write about it, if that's something that gives you peace, you have to find a way to get it out of the swirl in your head, because that swirl is like a tornado and it just gets stronger, right?
Yeah.
You have to let it out somehow in a way that's healthy.
Mhm.
Because what happens, as you were saying, with all of that grief that we're not letting ourselves feel, is at some point it will explode.
Mhm.
And I think that's a lot of what we're seeing right now as we're watching, people lashing out at each other in anger. I think it's a lot of repressed emotion and grief over the many, 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 many losses of all kinds that we've
Yeah.
all experienced in the last few years. And we're not talking about that. And that has some really problematic results, right? That I think is what we're seeing, is people feeling so much fear, feeling so scared, feeling so disoriented, feeling so much like they have no control over whatever normal is supposed to be. Like there's a whole lot going on for us. And then we're watching the environment, we're watching the heat waves, we're watching wars, we're like, there's a lot going on for us as a collective right now.
Yeah.
And a lot of it brings grief. A lot of it is about loss. So I think if you're in those early days and you really are like in the curled up on the ball sobbing phase and you're trying to figure out how to breathe,
Mhm.
there's ways to do that. If you're trying to, find someone to do your groceries for you, allow people to help you.
Mhm.
And what I would say to the supporters about that is, I love that people say, anything you need, I'm here for you, or some version of that. What I'll
Mhm.
tell you from the griever's perspective is that's of no help at all, because your brain is so foggy, because it's literally trying to rewire itself, right? That sense that you were talking about before about, wait, I'm going on a family vacation and like grandpa's not going to be there. Like your brain is busy making sense of your new reality for a long time, like years and years and years. Those early days, especially, people need practical support. And what they need from supporters is really specific offers.
Mhm.
Because I'm here for you, call me whatever you need. I can't conceptualize as a griever in those early days what on earth that might be. When I
Right.
realize I need something, I have no recollection of who offered,
Yeah.
right? It's an impossible ask. So if you can be really specific, I'm going to the grocery store today, go stand in front of your fridge and tell me what's not there, and I'll bring
Mhm.
it to you this afternoon. Do you need milk? Right? No, I don't need milk, but I need bread. And could you get apples or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Really specific offers. That's the way we can support grievers, especially in those really early days.
Yeah. That's such great advice, right? Like bring them food, clean their house, do their laundry, come do their dishes. Like the things that they can't possibly even think of. And like you
Yeah,
said, yeah, you don't know what you need. You need the person you lost and you're never
yeah,
going to get that. So,
exactly.
you know,
Yeah.
what do I
What would make me
need?
feel better is impossible.
Right.
So then what?
Right.
So then what? Then we have to like back to those baby steps, right? Baby steps, little choices. And yes, I was talking to someone not that long ago who had like a neighborhood angel who showed up and took her linens, like all her bedding and towels and stuff. And she would come pick them up on Wednesday and bring them back folded on Thursday.
I love that.
Genius, right? I don't
So
even know.
good.
It's nasty to think about how long it took us to change the sheets. I don't even want to think about it because whatever, who cares?
Yeah.
But those practical kinds of things, like there's no capacity to do them for most of us in
Yeah.
those early, early days. So yes, those kind of offers, I love to clean the house. Could I come and clean yours? Would that be helpful? You
Yeah.
know, can I
Mhm.
come twice a week and clean your kitchen for you? I'm free on Wednesdays and Fridays. What
Yeah.
time is good? Right? Really specific
Yeah.
And if they say no, they get to choose, right? Don't
Yeah.
show up with your bottle of, your basket of cleaning supplies if you haven't asked them first, right?
Totally.
But specific offers. And if they say no, that's okay. Don't stop offering,
Yeah.
because
That's a
the no is not right now. The no is not never. So keep offering, offer something different, and offer in ways that release that sense of being a burden. That's the other thing that's really problematic, especially in North America, where we have this kind of fierce independence, like we're supposed to be independent, which is, that's a different episode. But what it means for a lot of us is we don't want to be a burden. So if I
Mhm.
feel like I'm putting you out, I might not take you up on it. That's why I love the languaging about, like, I'm going to the grocery store. Do you need anything? I'm already doing it for myself. What can I bring you? I'm
Right.
making lasagna tonight for dinner because my kids love it. If I made a second one that you could freeze, would that be helpful?
That's great. Yeah.
Yes, like yes or no questions. When you're saying something, open-ended, creating space, right? We want them to feel seen. We want them to know we love them. That's all very open.
Yeah.
Offers of practical support, very specific. Yes, no answers. That's all we have space for.
That's such good advice. I mean, and it's so true.
Yeah. And when
So,
we talk about it, right, we can see, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. That's exactly was my experience,
yeah.
right? Those early days, I could hear the energetic of you wanting to love me and take care of me. But the practical of being able to conceive what that might be, I got nothing.
Yeah. Goodness. So now that you are 3 years into this grieving
Mhm.
process, what does grief look like for you now? Because I imagine, just from my own personal experience, right, with, I knew my great grandparents too as a child and lost them and lost my other grandfather when I was 18. But like I said, this grandfather was the closest person to me
Mhm.
that I've ever lost. And I imagine I will be grieving in some sort of way for the rest of my life, because to me,
Yep.
too, grieving is missing. I'm never going to stop missing my grandpa. Like, I'm just
Yeah.
not, and so obviously it's different. I don't cry every day. When
Mhm.
I think about him, I don't automatically get sad. I think more about like the good memories and stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas when it first happened, it is what it is. There's no
Yeah.
other way to put it. And so how is it now for you, 3 years in the grieving process of your son, and you're able to sit here and have this conversation with me?
Mhm.
So how would you describe it?
Yeah. It's so interesting to me. I'm with you. I will grieve Ben forever,
Mhm.
right? Because I will love him forever. The same way I, regularly think of my parents and, other people I've lost. That never ends. For me, the goal is about integration. So how do I integrate that loss into my life? How do I keep having a life, right?
Mhm.
And the integration piece to me is exactly as you're describing. It's that sense that you can think of your loved one and remember them with more love than pain. And there is a point where that shifts,
Mhm.
right? Where you can feel the love more strongly than the pain. I think the reality for me is that I'll have what I know. David Kessler is a brilliant grief educator and grief expert, and also a bereaved father. And that's who I did my training with. And I just think he's so brilliant. And his son was also named David. And so he calls them David moments. So his friends and family just know when he gets overwhelmed because of something, he just says, oh, I'm just having a David moment. So one of the things that I know is, yes, I don't cry every day anymore. I still cry regularly, often at times that I don't expect. And I'm okay with that. I sort of jokingly, lightly say, sometimes our emotions come out our eyes, and that's okay. They're supposed to. That's actually healthy.
Yeah.
Shoving them down and not acknowledging them is the unhealthy part. The fact that I still cry almost 3 years later because my child died seems very normal to me. I think that should be healthy.
Yeah.
What's important to know, I think, is that there are predictable times when that grief wave will come. Birthdays, the anniversary of the day he died, special occasions, that's really predictable. And then there's other times where it comes for no apparent reason at all, which is also normal. And then there's times where it's kind of a surprise and then it makes perfect sense. So the example that I'll give you of that happened to me like a week and a half ago. I was at a conference, and one of the things, and in an area that I had been to with the kids and their dad when we were married when they were little. And one of the things we did was we went on a little tour of the area. And the last time I had been at this one place that I love so much, it's one of my favorite places in the world, on the gorge in Oregon, the gorge between Oregon and Washington, called Multnomah Falls. And they're some of the most beautiful falls I've ever seen. And like, I've been to Niagara Falls and Hawaii. I've seen lots of falls. I'm obsessed with waterfalls. I love them. Ben
They're
also
amazing.
loved them, right? So we would, even as we're driving, see like a little trickle coming down like the side of a hill and be like, oh, there's a waterfall, like ridiculous.
Yeah.
So the last time I had been to this falls was with him and my daughter, and we had done the climb to the very top. So, and I was so looking forward to going to it. And I had said to my friend, if we don't see it on the way, then on our drive back, we'll stop there for sure, because it's so beautiful and blah, blah, blah. And as we're pulling in, I started to cry. And I thought, like, what? And so because now I'm like a student of my own grief and everyone else's, I'm immediately going with curiosity, like, this is so, like, I've been looking forward to coming to this place. Yeah. And it's not a surprise that I'm here. And I'm still crying because he's not here. Mm-hmm. Even though I'm like at a work conference, like it's not something he would have been at anyway. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Because it's just that reminder that he's not here. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting to me is, I can have a conversation about grief and how it works, and, ideas and suggestions, how it worked for me. That's very different for me, as anyone who's watching on YouTube can see, than when I'm talking about him. Mm-hmm. So I think we need to normalize that too, that not every way that we talk about our grief and loss impacts us emotionally the same way. Right. And a lot of the time when we're talking specifically about our person, which I personally love to do, mm-hmm. it brings the emotions up a different way. And I think that's perfectly normal.
I do too. 100%. I think that there is no way to label your grief normal, or, you know what I mean? Or not normal, or healthy or unhealthy. If you are experiencing it and expressing it, then it's normal.
Yeah. Yeah. The only thing I would say is unhealthy is if you're pretending that it's not a thing in your life.
Right.
That's unhealthy.
That's unhealthy for every aspect of your life.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Any other experience you're having with grief, someone else has had it. Someone else has experienced it. And we just don't know that because we're not talking about it.
Yeah.
We talk about so many things in our lives, but we don't talk about that. So we need to make a shift there. The same way we did. I mean, when I grew up, there were rules about what you talked about at the dinner table. You didn't talk about religion. You didn't talk about money, like so many things that now we talk about really relatively openly, mm-hmm. have been taboo topics in the past. And so to me, grief is just one of the ones that needs to move down that continuum of, how do we have healthy conversations about it?
Definitely. Yeah. Well, Suzanne, oh my goodness, this has been such a wonderful conversation. Can you please tell our listeners where they can find you? We will put all of this in the show notes too, but just if someone, hops off here and wants to go find you, where can they find you on social media, website, all those good things?
Yeah, thank you so much. The best place to find me 100% is the website. And that's alivedexperience.com, which, as you said, will be in the show notes, but it's those words spelled out, nothing complicated. There's two things you can do there. You can sign up for the newsletter, which comes out fairly regularly every second Friday. And there I'm just sharing what I'm learning. I write a blog post every 2 weeks, so that will be there. Podcasts I've been on, I share those links there. And then any workshops or offerings that I have coming up are always in the newsletter. If anything about this resonated with you and you want to know more about my work and, whether I can help you or your organization, you can book a time on my calendar on the website. And then, take a peek around. All the links to socials are there. So it's easiest. It's a great one-stop shop. Go there, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, the things are all there. And take a look around. There's some free resources. There's a great ebook about how grief shows up at work, which is really important to me, that people understand that and that we change workplaces. And if there's anything that's not there that you wish was there, fire me an email and I'll put something together for you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so, so much. I've loved this conversation and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.